This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Nun Zayin, and we're holding in the bottom of Nun Vav and Beis, and all the learning for this month. The month of Teves has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf as a Schos Aliyas Nishama for his father Arya ben Ya'akov V'siyat Dishmayo. A Schos to learn for such an incredible Nishama Yid that was Eicha to learn in Yeshiva by Naftali Trop. V'siyat Dishmayo. Our Torah should connect us with his neshama, elevating his neshama higher and higher in Gan Eden Shel Mailam. We pick it up in the bottom of Vav Amid Beis, and we are holding 4 lines into the wide lines as the Gemara. One second, I apologize. As the Gemara begins discussing a new topic, the topic of the Dalid Shaimer. Shaimer Chinam, Shaimer Sachar, Seicher, V'Hashayel, and the different dinim that apply to each. And Mir Tashan, as we go through, we will fill in all the requisite dinim. So says the Gemara, Itmar. We learned, and in order to, once we know that there's Dalid Shaimer, then we could apply other cases of Shaimrim which are similar. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, Itmar, Shaimer Aveda. What is the status of one who's watching a lost object? Someone finds a lost object, and before he returns it, what does he have to do? He has to hold on to it, and in order till he could return it to the owner, as Rashi quotes the pasuk, so what status is a person who is watching the Aveda of his friend? Says the Gemara, we have a classical machlokes, Rabba and Rav Yosef. Rabba Omer Kishemer Chinam Dami, Rav Yosef Omer Kishemer Sachar Dami. Is this guy who's watching his friend's object that he found, is he considered like a paid watchman, a Shomer Sachar, or is he considered like a unpaid watchman, a Shomer Chinam? And the difference, of course, being that there's different levels of a chiyuve shemira, of obligations, how much one has to watch and what he is obligated for in the event of mishap, of geneva, if the item is subsequently stolen, or if it's lost, etc. So explains the Gemara, Rabba, why? What benefit am I getting? I'm watching your lost object. No one's paying me, so I'm a quintessential Shomer Chinam, says Rabba. Yosef Amar, no. Kishemer Sachar Dami. Why? What's the Hanam? Bahi Hana, with that benefit, while you are watching your friend's object, you're Isaac b'mitzvah. So if an ani were to come knock on the door, you would not have to give him money. So with that benefit, that you don't have to give a pruta to an ani, have kishemer sachar. Consider like a shemer sachar. Just to parenthetically point out this long and lengthy thesis on the bottom of the Amid. Bahi Hana, Deloi, Kabai Lemesa Rifta La'anya. Taisus points out what's the reason. Now, but Taisus is bothered by the $1 million kasha. I don't understand. Because his lost object is sitting in my closet, I don't have to give money to a guy who knocks on the door. So therefore, on a similar vein, if I'm wearing tefillin, I don't have to do any mitzvahs. What does that mean? So Taisus says that what Gemara must be referring to vidavka b'shah shemis asik ba. At the time that you're proactively and actively dealing with the lost object, kigain shaitel itzarka, that you're spreading out the object for its benefit, omisham esech shesarich la lavid, or something else that the lost object needs. Aval, says Taisus, b'shalash avida bebeisai lo yipoter milamesa vrifta la'ani. Why? The $1 million words, Kivan sheyachal lekayem shneim. And that is Taisis Shita with Isaac b'mitzvah, Bater min mitzvah. It's only if while you're doing mitzvah A, you cannot do mitzvah B. If there's an active involvement in the returning of the Aveda, in the care for the Aveda. So during the active involvement, I can't give a proof to Tanani. But if there's a passive involvement that the Aveda is just sitting in my closet, then of course I could give, and I would be obligated to give the pruta for an ani, but it's for that reason that Rav Yosef considers this Shomer Aveda like a Shomer Sachar. As why? Because you're getting benefit. Continues the Gemara, Ikin de Mefarshi, there are those that learn this Machlekes Achi, between Rabbi and Rav Yosef, slightly different. Rav Yosef, Shomer Sachar, Tami, Kim de Rachmana, Shabdei, Bal Karche, Helkach, Shomer Sachar. The reason why, according to Rav Yosef, you're Shomer Sachar, according to the second Lashon, because since the Torah puts it into your Rishos, since you're obligated not by choice, but by the Torah's dictum, therefore, you automatically get the din of a Shomer Sachar Tami. Now, with that machlekes, the Rabbah says you're Shomer Chinam, Rav Yosef says you're Shomer Sachar. Now we will have the classical give and take, kashas and terutzim back and forth between the two. Eisvei Rav Yosef, who holds it's a Shomer Sachar, L'Rabba, who holds it's a Shomer Chinam. As we turn over to Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, Rav Yosef asks the Rabbah the following kasha: Hechzira lemakim sherena. If someone returns the lost object, a halacha, you don't necessarily have to give it to the hands of the bailim, but rather you put it in a place that the bailim, that the owner is going to find it. Einoi chayiv, says the Brisa, letapel ba. You no longer have to deal with it. Nignava oy avda chayiv b'achriyusa. But if the object is stolen or lost, then you are obligated. So again, I find your lost object, I have to return it to you. I know, you're going to pass by such and such place, so I'm allowed to take the lost object and leave it there, and you'll come and get it. If I put it there, says the Brisa, I don't have to do anything else. But if the item is stolen or lost, then I am obligated. So again, this is a kasha that Rav Yosef is asking to rabbis. Rav Yosef is going to prove that one is like a paid watchman. Says the Gemara, my ningnavai of the, what does it mean? And excuse me. So this already shows us that it's at some level like a Shomer Sachar, like Rav Yosef said, because the din of a Shomer Sachar is what? That you're obligated for Geneva v'Aveda. And Rav Yosef now articulates that point. My nignava yavda, lav nignava mi beisai v'avda mi beisai. That it was stolen or lost from the person who finds the Aveda from my house. And we see that you have a classical din of a Shomer Sachar. And therefore, if it was nigda or avda from my house, I'm chayiv. Answers the Gemara for Rabbi Loi. It means b'machim shechzira. You have to read the Brisa straight. What is nignavai avda? From the place that you returned it to. Then you're chayiv. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But then it just doesn't read. Vakatani, but it said, if you return it to a place he's going to see it, and then it continues and says, but if it gets stolen or lost, you're obligated? How does that make any sense? It says you're not obligated. Says Rabbi, you know what's going on over here? You returned it in the evening. Vetarti katani law, and the Brisa is teaching 2 different cases. Vachi katani. Hechzira shachris lamakim sherena. You turned it in the morning, the place that'll see it. Ushechiach ta'ayil v'nafik v'chazila. And you know he's going to pass by. He's going to go to daven. He passes by this area. Again, shachris doesn't mean davening. It just means in the morning. But he passed it in a place that you know the bailim are going to pass by regularly. Then you did yours. And you're done. You finished. You returned it. You turned it in the evening. Place will see it. But he doesn't come there as commonly Maybe it's going to take a few hours till he comes and sees his lost object, and then in the interim, that's what you're chayiv, because there were a few hours that the item was sitting in a place, quote unquote, unwatched. It's true he was eventually going to come, but it's going to take some time, and that's the reason why he is obligated for returning it to that area. So, Akasha to Rabbah, and Rabbah's defense. Esvei, Rav Yosef asks another kasha, says the Brisa, Le'olam uchayiv, you're always obligated, Achech zirenu, Lirishusa, he says the Brisa, you're obligated to watch the lost object until you return it to his property. My la'olam, what does it mean la'olam? Lava filu mi beisai, does it not mean that you're obligated even from your own house? Meaning that the Brisa would goofa be honing in. I found your object, and now I'm obligated until I return it, even though the item is sitting in my house. But if it gets stolen or lost from that place, then what's the halacha? Then halacha is that I am chayiv. Why would I be chayiv? Because of a classical din of a shemer sachar. Amar Le responds, Rabba, no. If it was an animal, then I'm asking why. The kivan denakti loho nigri mi brace nigra baraisa. Since they have the habit of going outside, says Rabba, generally I hold that the shomer aveda is a shomer chinam. However, in a scenario that you find your friend's lost animal, the animal that clearly wandered away on its own, so now you have realized that this animal has such a tendency, and therefore you have a higher level of shemira, of watching necessary. And in that case, as Rabbah, I am maskim that you would have to watch it more. Flips the tables, continues the Gemara, smack in the middle of the Amid. First word of line is Eisvei, Rabbah l'Rav Yosef. So now Rabbah holds he's a shomer chinam, shoots back a shaylam to Rav Yosef. Says the Torah, ha-sheif, they have to return a lost object. From here we learn out, says Rabbah, ein li ela mi bebeisai. From here we learn they have to return the lost object to the person's house. How do you know that you're even allowed to return it to the owner's garden, to his backyard? So says the Rabbah to Rav Yosef, you hold it to Shemer Sachar, but 1 second. We have a special pasuk that darshans you're allowed to return the object even to his garden, even to his deserted building, his backyard. Explains the Rabbah his kasha now. What does this brisa mean that you're allowed to return it to his garden, to his building? If you're returning it to his garden, that is guarded. Hainu beisai. Then what's the chiddush? That's the exact same thing as returning it to his house. Ella, rather, what must we say, says Rabbah, the brisa must be referring to Pshita. To an area that is not watched. Shema minas, we have a raya that what? Kishomer chinam dami must be as a din of a shomer chinam. And that's the reason why you're allowed to return it even to a place that is not guarded. Amar Le responds Rav Yosef, Loilam Niginasa Mishtameres, Fuchavasa Mishtameres. Udikakash Shalach, and it's bothering you. Hainu Beisa, it's the same case. Akaman Shalon, what's the Chiddush? Deloi Be'inan Das Bailim. That when you return something, you do not need to notify the owner that you returned it. That's the Chiddush, but not in where you returned it to. And therefore it says Rav Yosef, indeed, you're returning it to a guarded area, meaning, yes, you are a Shomer Sachar. Keder Rav Elazar, like Rav Elazar, Damar Rav Elazar, Kol Shrichen Das Bailim, Chotz Me'ashavas Haveda. You do not need to tell the owner that you're returning it. Why? Because Gufa Sharibsa B'Torah Hashavas Harbe, the Torah included many types of returning, and part and parcel of the additional chedushin that you can return it to multiple places is what? Is that you don't need das bailim. So now continues the Gemara. Rabbi had kashas, Rav Yosef had kashas. They both defended. Now another kasha in Rav Yosef, but this time it is from Abaya. Omar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. We're 10 lines to the bottom of Nanzayim and Aleph. The first word on line is Hashavois Harbe. Says Abaye to Rav Yosef, A'atloi Tizbra d'Shem Raveda k'Shem Rechinam Dami. Really, Rav Yosef? You don't hold it as a din of a Shem Rechinam? Rav Chia Barabba, Rav Yechanan. Rav Chia Barabba taught in the name of Rav Yechanan the Gemara that we'll get to in a week or two. What happens if one has a lost object which disappears? They bring him to court and he says, he says, you know what happened? The item was stolen. And then what happens later is we find out, yes, it was stolen, but he was the culprit. If you look at Rashi for a quick moment, I know it's getting late. Rashi says, a little bit higher up, Tainis Ganif, why does he say it was stolen? To exempt himself. But then we find out that guess what? It wasn't stolen. He really had it. He stole it. What's the halacha? Says the Gemara later on. Mishan tashlume kefel kiganav atzman. He has to pay kefel. He has to pay double, like when one steals the item. So continues Rashi and articulates the shaila of Abaye to Rav Yosef. Therefore, it makes sense that you pay kefil. Why? Because he was trying to make himself potter. Because the shemer chinam would have been potter by saying it was stolen, and therefore the fact we find out that he was one that stole it, he pays kefil. But back to the Gemara, what's the halacha? Mishad Tashlumi kefil articulates the Gemara. So if it's a shomer chinam, it makes sense why he would have to pay kefil. But if according to you, Rav Yosef, he has a din of a shomer sachar, amay mishad Tashlumi kefil. Karna ba'ishlume. That what? When he said that it was stolen, that wasn't a time to exempt himself. He's obligated at that moment. So at that moment, when he says it was stolen, he should have to pay kefel. So where would it come on to the eventuality that we find out that he stole it and he pays kefel? He should have to pay keren, the principal. Amar le, Rav Yosef responds 2 lines to the bottom. He claimed there was armed robbers with force, and in such a scenario, even a shemer sachar is potter. Amar le, excuse me. Amar le, Abaye responds, listed mizuyin, gazlanu is a gazlan. Therefore, what says Rashi? Therefore, it's a tain of an oines. Therefore, there will be no eventuality, even if he's the one that stole it, that you pay kefel, because kefel is only a payment for regular geneva. Amar le, responds Rav Yosef in last line, Sha'ani oimer, I hold this to mizuyan is kima de mimtar inchi ganifu. Since they hide from people, they have a din of a ganif, not a gazlon. Therefore, there is a payment of kefel. Again, a ganif is someone who steals, but does it in secrecy. A gazlon is someone who steals in broad daylight. By a gazlon, there is no kefil. By a ganov, there is. The kasha of the Gemara was, if he's an armed robber, we think he's a gazlon, therefore there being no kefil. Rabbi Yisrael responds, no, he is a din of a ganov, and therefore there is a din of kefil. Says the Gemara, Eisvei. Now this Eisvei, let's not get confused. This is not an Eisvei going back on the root machlekes Abaye and Rav Yosef. This is an Eisvei on the line that Rav Yosef just said. Rav Yosef just said that listed mizuyim armed robbers, because they hide from people, have a din of a ganov. So Eisvei on that line of Rav Yosef asks the Gemara, as we turn over to Nanzayim and Beis, Loi im amarta b'shemer chinam shkei mishan tashlume kefel timer b'shemer sachar sheina mishan tashlume kefel. Asks the Gemara on Rav Yosef on the top of Nanzayim and Beis, The brisa that says that you do not pay kefel, how could it be? Is hagadaitach listed mizuyin ganavu. Then nimsa b'shemer sachar mishanta shlume kefel b'toyin tanis listed mizuyin. So what's going on over here? Rav Yosef, how can you potentially hold that list of mizuyin have a din of a gazalon without there and then negating the obligation of kefel? We see clearly from the brisa that is not the case. Just for one moment, look at the top Rashi. Rashi keys this in that this loim amarta says Rashi that this is a masnitahi. Rashi interestingly points it out. Lo yadana hechatanya. I don't know where exactly this was quoted. This brisa. So says the Gemara, Rav Yosef defends his opinion 5 lines down. Amar lei, hachi kamar. This is what I mean to say. Lo yimamarta b'shem rechinam, shkem b'shamta shumei kefel, b'chol ta'inaisav. Taimer b'shem esachar, shein b'shamta shumei kefel, ella b'toyin tanis listam mizuyin. So Rav Yosef has to say, no, you have to read a little bit deeper into the brisa. The brisa was honing in on the fact that Hashem rechinam never will come on to such a scenario, and they'll always have to pay kefel, whereas the shomer sachar is not the case. Says the Gemara, Esvei. Again, another kasha on Rav Yosef, but not on the din of Rav Yosef, that a shomer aved is like a shomer sachar, but rather on the din of Rav Yosef, that the listin mizuyim, the armed robbers, have a din of a gazlon, a din of a ganaf, Therefore, there would potentially be kefel. Eisvei v'nishbar oimes. Says the pasuk, if someone borrows an animal, and then what happens? Nishbar, it breaks a bone. Oimes, or the animal dies. Shalim to shalim loy. You have to pay. So explains the brisa. What does this pasuk mean? Ein li ella shvura umeisa. We see in this brisa that a shayel, someone who borrows an animal, if the animal was stolen, if the animal suffered a broken bone, or if the animal dies, then the halacha is that you have to pay. Geneva v'aveda minayin asks the brisa, where do we see that a shayel is chayiv for Geneva v'aveda? Amar kal v'chaymer. I'll tell you a kal v'chaymer. Uma shaymer sachar shapater b'shvur ameisa. A shaymer sachar, a paid watchman who is pater from the animal, from paying if an animal has a broken bone or dies, and yet the shomer sachar is chayiv Geneva v'aveda. He has to pay for Geneva v'aveda. So shayel, a borrower, shechayiv v'shvura meisa ein aydin, is it not the same shechayiv Geneva v'aveda, that you're obligated for Geneva v'aveda? And says the brisa about 12 lines down, the first one line is v'zehu kal v'chaymer she'ein alav tshuva. They say kal v'chaymer, that you cannot ask any questions on it. Says the brisa, the makar that a shayel is obligated for Geneva v'aveda being learnt from the shomer sachar, that the shayel is obligated for shvura umeisa, broken bone or death, so certainly is obligated for Geneva v'aveda. So articulates Abaye's kashan Rav Yosef. V'is al gedaitach listim mizuyin is a ganavu. Amayin alav tshuva. What do you mean this is a kal v'chaymer? That a limit for shayel from shomer sachar, you can't ask a kasha. You know what kasha I'll ask you? There's a simple question. Shomer Sachar would have to pay kefel if he claims listim mizuyim, whereas a shayel would not. So there would be a case that a shomer sachar is more chamer than a shayel. So once I find one case that a shomer sachar is more chamer than a shayel, says Abaye, that's a kal v'chaymer. The whole brisa was saying we can learn that a shayel is chayiv for Geneva v'aveda. Why? Because a shayel is more chayiv, more chamer, so certainly they're going to be obligated for Geneva v'aveda. But says Abaye, according to Rav Yosef, that a shomer sachar has to pay kevel by tayin tanis mizuyim. There's an element that it is more chamer than the shayel. Amar le, Rav Yosef responds, Kesavar Aitana, this time holds karna b'lo shvua, adifa mikfela b'shvua. These are big concepts but Metzia concepts that we'll get back to Siyat Ishmaya. But answers Rav Yosef, this Tana is going to be of the opinion that having to pay without a Shavua is more chamer than having to pay with a Shavua. So even though, says Rav Yosef, yes, I hold that the Shomer Sachar will eventually have more times to pay kefel due to the case that a list of mezuyim has the din of a ganof. However, that's only with a shvua, whereas this brisa is referring to the chumrah of the shayl over the Shomer Sachar, which is without a shvua. So continues the Gemara, we're smack in the middle of the Amid. First one line is Bishvua, Lema Misayeh Alei. Let's bring a raya now to Rav Yosef. A raya that list of mezuyim have a din of a ganef. Says the Brisa, Asoicha Par Mechaver of Nignava. V'Amer Hala Irini Mishalim. What happens if someone rents a cow from his friend and it gets stolen, and the renter says, Irini Mishalim, I'm gonna pay, Veini Nishra, I don't want to swear. And then you know what happens. V'achar kach nimsa ganof. We find the one that stole it. Mishalim tashlume kefil lasoicher. Since the renter said, I'm willing to pay and not swear, the renter takes over the place of the owner. And the halacha is that if the eventuality that the ganof is found, he pays the kefil straight to the renter. So says the Gemara, Savrua Rav Yehuda thought, Rav Yehuda thought that a soicher, which is what this price is referring to, one who rents, has the same din as a noisei sachar, same din as a shomer sachar. If that would be true, then we have a raya to Rav Yosef. Omedik, talking from the fact that it says, I'll pay and not swear, mechlal. We see from there, he was able to swear and exempt himself, this renter. So, what's the case? The case seemingly is that he claimed there were armed robbers that stole the cow, and yet, yet the Brisa says that in the eventuality the ganav is found, there's a payment of kefil asaycher. So Shema Mina, we have a raya list of mizuyan ganafu from the fact that there will be the eventuality of a kefil payment which only exists by a ganaf and not by a ganazalon. So says the Gemara, would have been a nice raya, but there are too many hanachas. So Amri, they answered, me, Savers, Rav Yehuda. Are we going that opinion of Rav Yehuda, Damar Seicher is, can I say Sachar Dami? No. Dama Karameir, maybe we're going with Rav Meir, Svirle Damar. Seicher is Kishem Chinam Dami. And that's the reason why there's a payment of Kefal, nothing to do with our sugya of Rav Yosef of list of Mizuyin being the din of a ganav, but rather because it's the case of a shemer chinam. Iba Yisem another teretz kidamachlev Rabbi Ravua Vitani, as Rabbi Ravua taught, switched around and learned Seicher Ketzim Mishalim Rameir Mikshem Misach Rav Yehuda Mikshem Chinam. And therefore, again, another way of learning that the Brisa is going to be referring to Rabbi Yehuda, but it'll be a shemer chinam. So says the Gemara, and this we conclude, Rav Zera Amar. Says Rav Zera, no, there's a different reason why there's a payment of kefel, because it wasn't listed mezuyim. It's true, that's what he claimed, but lamaisa they were not armed, and that's why there's eventuality of paying kefel. But again, there would be no raya to Rav Yosef in this brisa. We'll pick it up from the two dots the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.